Great. Thank you. Good morning. Good morning. Feeling the energy and the insight from yesterday. So thank you for such a great start and looking forward to maximizing today. Oh, is it clicking? Are the slides up? Hello, hello. Okay, so we saw that you had to bring back the bubbles a little bit because we want to see those, but I'm not going to repeat it. I'm actually going to use it to motivate some new work and some new data and kind of motivate some forward-looking research and then actually tell a story. So this was the kind of initial framework. Again, it's very general, but captures a lot of important features. And one thing I just wanted to emphasize is, again, this point that I was making yesterday, which is it's fairly radical to be moving out of the efficacy bubble. There's a lot of incentives and temptations to stay there. It's tightly controlled. There's a lot of incentives to do novel things, both for researchers and for implementers. Donors often demand the shiny thing, the new thing. This idea of sticking with something and kind of staying the long haul and pressure testing it and doing the nitty-gritties of implementation remains underinvested and under-incentivized in. And a lot of the work that we was hearing about yesterday, in fact, all and today, is really moving out of that bubble into these other bubbles, which is exciting. One thing I want to talk about is this gap between policy plans and practice. I think yesterday a lot of the work probably fit in the kind of efficacy to efficacy plus, some fit in other places, but I want to just highlight the policy plans to practice gap with some new data. So we just released actually at the beginning of this week, late last week, a new paper in Nature Human Behavior, which tried to quantify that gap. And I think everyone kind of knows that there is a gap between policy and practice, but how big is it? And how does it vary by region and by different types of policies? So we have this new piece, Mind the Gap between Education and Policy, which tried to quantify that. And here's just one figure from that. There's a few. And what this is looking at, this is actually looking at the time of COVID, which was a time of substantial policy innovation. And so this was an interesting moment to see when there was a new need and a crisis. Did governments react? Did they respond? Did they initiate remote education policies to respond to the crisis? And often we perceive policy to be kind of a slow and rigid process. And so we used some data that the World Bank, UNESCO, and UNICEF collected from ministries of education, civil servants from over 100 countries to see what government officials said they did. Did they enact remote education policies, teachers calling students, radio, TV? And interestingly, what you can see in the blue is almost in all regions, over 90 to almost up to 100% of countries enacted some kind of new policy. Now, obviously, there was a lot of motivation. So we have to think about kind of a post-COVID setting and a pre-COVID setting, and will this translate? But governments responded with new policies. Did households actually receive these things that government officials were saying was part of the policy? So we actually looked at data from the World Bank at the household level surveys on what citizens and households said they were actually receiving and what they were participating in. Were they tuning into the radio? Were they receiving calls from teachers? And that's the orange. And the gap there is kind of telling you how big it is. So you can see in Latin America, actually, most of the citizens were saying they were actually receiving these services. There was a very small policy practice gap, about 5%. In sub-Saharan Africa, just over 20% of households said they received any of these policies directly. So there the gap is almost 80%, 70 to 80%. So seeing this variation across regions is really enlightening, and we see a bit of a bright spot in Latin America. But we also see it's a first-order issue in some places like sub-Saharan Africa. And maybe this is explaining a big part of the learning crisis. So of course, we want good policies, and that's really hard. But then we actually have to make sure that they're implemented. And that's extremely hard. And so this is motivating some of that, quantifying that. We have more data as well in the paper, seeing was the policy naive to begin with, or was it realistic? So were governments launching radio policies where there were no radios, or were there actually radios? What we actually find is most of the policies were really realistic. They were actually quite attuned to the realities. There weren't internet-based policies where internet access was low. So this is encouraging. The policy wasn't naive. That's not here, but it's in the paper. But it was really the implementation that was quite difficult. We also looked at data from a pre-COVID setting. So we used the SABER data that the World Bank's collected, and we also triangulated that with household level surveys for ECD policies. And we see almost identical patterns. And so this is just motivating different types of research and even descriptive research to just quantify these gaps, understand them, and systematically investigate them as we move forward. Just one example. And so these gaps are big, they need to be addressed, and we're excited about, over the course of the hub, trying to bring systematic data on each of these bubbles, each of these arrows, and see descriptive work, qualitative work, quantitative experimental work, and really start to unpack this puzzle. So that's some data. I've had to start with some data. I also want to tell a bit of a story. So we were trying to scale up teaching at the right level in Botswana. And in many ways, you could actually say we started at efficacy plus, because teaching at the right level already had evidence from India, had lots of randomized studies, lots of different types of evidence, had been pressure tested. So in that sense, actually, by the time it was being adapted to Botswana, it had already achieved a lot of efficacy plus. It's sort of one of those interventions that's high up there on that pressure tested state. And there was a lot of interest at a high level and at the ground level. So there was implementation on the ground. It was rolling out across the country. And then at the high level, the permanent secretary of the Ministry of Education signed a memorandum of understanding, really committing to scaling this up, and even budgeted for it, and a big line item in the budget. And actually, the Ministry of Finance allocated a big budget for this to hire teachers who had been not yet deployed into the system to deliver the program in a dedicated fashion. So this was really exciting, kind of historic to get such a mobilized effort at such a high level and into the ministry budget in finance and in education. But it didn't work out. And one of the reasons it didn't work out was when we actually went to recruit the teachers with the government, there was no form for this new scheme to employ teachers. So there was a form to engage teachers in the prior scheme, but not this new scheme of actually unemployed teachers who are now being redeployed into the system. There wasn't a form designed for this. So the forms office said, can't do it. And so the teachers actually been recruited. The money was actually there. The evidence was there, the teams were there, but there was no form. And yeah, people can associate with this. I could see maybe people have found themselves in the forms office too. And the forms office wouldn't budge. There's no form. And the permanent secretary said, what's going on here? We got to be able to get a form. And everyone's getting mobilized and people are running around. Forms office, there's no form. No form. And so for months and months, we're trying to get this form. And by the time we had almost succeeded to get the form, but we didn't quite manage, the line item had to be used elsewhere before the fiscal year was over. So this scheme never got off the ground. This kind of employing the unemployed teachers who had been on the waiting list to do this in dedicated fashion, but not all was lost. What we pivoted to, which is probably what we should have tried all along, was of course using teachers who are already in the system, rather than kind of designing a new ambitious scheme, even though we got it budgeted. We use teachers who are already deployed in the system. And as Moitepi shared yesterday, this is now in 9 out of 10 regions in the country. And that worked out really well. And so I think this was a really enlightening lesson of, even when there's sort of an exciting ambition and a new opportunity and a line item, it's just so hard to work within the bureaucracy. And of course, there are experts in the room on this. And often things can get stuck at the form level. And so part of our aspiration at the Hub is to really pay close attention to these issues, to take them really seriously, to make sure that they're front and center, to study them, to interrogate them, to work with them, and to have folks who are experts in navigating them, driving the agenda. So let's pay attention to the forms. And with that, I will just end with kind of a final notion here. So this is, we have kind of our main intellectual framework, but we also have a simple imagery and visualization for how we're thinking about translating evidence and synthesizing it and connecting it with implementation. So this strand of work is being led by Michelle Koffenberger. And so this captures the connection between research and implementation. And this is at the heart of what we're trying to do, which is really connect these dots. And one of our aspirations is to try to encourage research to be more implementation focused, more implementation relevant, and synthesize that, generate that so that it's directly informing and embedded into day-to-day implementation. And in addition, we're trying to capture all of the incredible knowledge that is happening in implementation that just sometimes is not getting codified. Sometimes there's tons of tacit knowledge and explicit knowledge, but it's just not being captured as often because there's just so much fast-pacedness and action, and we don't have the time to capture it. And so one of our aspirations is to codify and capture so much of the knowledge that's happening in implementation and connect that dot with research in all directions. One thing I'm really inspired by in this room and in this conference is I think we have a really nice mix of researchers, policymakers, practitioners, and donors. And that's actually really rare and hard, and we can all appreciate that, to have us all under one roof, speaking a fairly common language, maybe not yet as common, but eventually over the course of the hub, it will become more common, we hope, and really having it all under one roof, exchanging notes, trading notes, and really driving this agenda. So thank you so much to everyone who has come to the hub, so excited for day 2, already so energized by day 1, and looking forward to the day ahead. Thank you.
Thanks so much, everyone. So my name's Sabina Morley. I'm a Senior Education Advisor and lead the Girls Education Programmes team at FCDO, based in our headquarters. And I'm really delighted to be chairing our first panel on day 2. We have 4 great speakers lined up to talk to you about adaptive testing and iteration. Now, they are all from implementing organisations, so we'll bring some really great insights and reflections on how you can optimise education interventions on their scaling journey. So from GNOME's implementation science framework, I think a lot of the discussions will be on the kind of efficacy plus and effectiveness bubbles, and of course, all in an effort to influence policy and practice at scale. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to our first speaker, who is Nancy Gikandi from Dignitas, who's going to talk about the Lead Now coaching app. So thanks very much, Nancy.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Nancy. I serve as the Research and Development Manager at Dignitas, and today I'm going to be speaking to you about a study that we did in 2023. We're testing our online training and coaching application that's called Lead Now. So let me do an activity with you. I'd like you to close your eyes. Trust your neighbor, trust me, just close your eyes. I'd like you to imagine a world where schools are vibrant places for children to thrive and succeed. How does that world look like to you? What are the qualities of the schools? To Dignitas, the quality of these schools are children feel seen, they are heard, teachers are qualified, school leaders provide the support that teachers need. Instructional quality is learner-centered. Parents are engaged. The school environment is conducive for learning. There is adequate infrastructure. That is why we exist as Dignitas, and that is what keeps us awake every day and night. That's what we work towards, and that's what I'm going to be presenting to you, how we create this vision. So you can open your eyes. Great. So what's our motivation? So before the motivation, we're based in Nairobi, Kenya. So all our work we've done in Kenya, but in 2018, we did work in South Sudan. And so our motivation is that children are in school, but they're not learning. And so this is all in the context of Kenyan. So there's a study that was done by Usawa Agenda, which is an NGO that's based in Kenya and does assessments on learning outcomes in Kenya, Uganda, and Tanzania. And so the data you see here is that literacy and numeracy learning outcomes, there is a gap there. So 4 out of 10 grade 4 learners are meeting expectations, and the same to numeracy, where we have only 50% of the grade 4 learners that were assessed do meet numeracy expectations. And why are children not learning? So we also do our own studies. So as part of the programs that we implement, we do collect assessment data in schools. And we've seen that there is a problem with the quality of instruction that's been delivered to the learners, which is one of the root causes for why children are not learning. And so this is data that we conducted in 30 schools in Nairobi. And these were low-fee private schools. And we can see that there is a challenge even on the kind of support the teachers are getting from the instructional leaders. And so what have we been doing? So even from the presentation by the former minister yesterday, sorry, I don't remember your name, but he said that teachers and school leaders are agents of change, and that is what we believe as dignitars. And so our model is anchored around 3 pieces. So we have teacher support and development, we have improved pedagogy, and we have effective school leadership. And so everything we do, we develop programs, and even our Lead Now up around these, and you'll get to see how our Lead Now application is actually structured around the 3. But most important, our model, we believe that coaching, and you've seen evidence to date that coaching is key in driving, improving shifts in practices among educators, but also for the educators to sustain the practices that they do acquire from the different interventions. And so this is the model of how coaching is done. So we start by setting the goals, and then they practice what they've learned, and then there is observation to see how they're implementing the practices. Then they are given feedback by a coach or maybe a fellow, like peer-to-peer coaching in the school, or even the middle tier actors who we work closely with. And then there's reflection even again on the end of the coachee to see how they need to keep improving themselves. And so the question for us has been, how do we scale coaching? Right? It's costly if we do it in person. And so we designed Lead Now with that in mind. How do we strengthen remote coaching in place for the in-person coaching? What elements do we need to add to the remote coaching support so that we can drive that shift in practice? And so welcome to Lead Now. So Lead Now is our training and online, training and coaching online toolkit. And so the way it's structured is that we start from an introduction where they're told about Lead Now and what the journey looks like. And then we start with a formative assessment. So they get to assess themselves, the knowledge before going through the modules. And then from the modules, they get to go through scenario-based learning resources that we developed in collaboration with the University of York, together with educators from different school settings, the public schools and the low-fee private schools. So we brought together these educators, and they developed the scenario-based learning resources, which are basically real-time or like real-life scenarios based on their experiences and the ones they live in schools. And from how they're meant to do it is that they go through the resources and they tell us the level of appropriateness on how they would react to those or respond to those should they face them in school. And that gives us like an understanding of how they think, how they apply the different practices. And from there, they go to the how-to guides, which are basically telling them like what the concept is all about, what they need to do in school, and how they actually apply it. But then with coaching, we are key on modeling. So modeling is a critical part of coaching, even in person. And so how we've done it on Lead Now is that they have access to animations and videos, which they look at, and through these animations, they get an idea of how they actually put the skill into practice in school. Then there is reflection. So of course, with reflection, they need to think about, okay, what am I hearing? What am I learning? What have I been doing? What do I need to change? And so this is mostly open-ended sort of questions that they're responding to, where they need to think about, okay, so these are the goals I need to set for me. If I've learned about lesson planning, for instance, how have I been doing it and what do I need to take away with me? Then they give us feedback again. So it's the end of the module. And a module, we give them 2 weeks to complete a module. So within the 2 weeks, they're able to go through the entire learning cycle. And then they give us the feedback and they continue with the learning journey. And so in collaboration with Global Schools Forum, we went through a rigorous process as we're designing the tests and the study that I'm going to be sharing with you. And the first step was as a team thinking about what's the theory of change, what problem do you want to address here? And yesterday, one of the speakers talked about healthy debates, something like that. And so we went through a series of conversations around what do we test, what's our golden indicator. So we had to think about what we want to track, just one thing that we want to track, and that is going to tell us that whether Lead Now is actually effective or not based on the theory of change. And even in terms of the test, do you want to test more than one item, or do you want to test more than 2, or is it just 1? So there is a lot that we learned also while we're doing that. And so that's basically the simplified theory of change, but there is one that has so many arrows and so many connections that I didn't want to present here, but that's basically how we are doing it. So the test, we implemented the test in 2 counties in Kenya, and we managed to onboard 825 participants. And the participants we target with Lead Now are the teachers who are teaching grades 1 to 3, but also the instructional leaders who are the school head teachers or deputies. But we work with the designated instructional leader who is the deputy of the school according to the Ministry of Education. So these are the ones who are expected to support teaching and learning in the classroom. And so with these instructional leaders and the teachers, they went through 2 modules, and we have a total of 12 modules. And the reason for 2 modules is because we only had 1 academic term of 3 months to test. So we didn't have wanted to overdose them with that. And we know meaningfully that will not yield any good results because of the timeline being a barrier. So we did that between May to August, and our test terms are as shown below. So we had Lead Now. So there was this group that was going through Lead Now only. Another group was going through Lead Now plus school-based professional learning communities, or what is known as communities of practice. And then we had another group that was going through remote coaching phone calls together with Lead Now. And so these different groups were going through concurrently, like they were going through the learning process concurrently. And in terms of the data that we were able to collect, so on Lead Now, we do collect data on knowledge, we do collect data on attitudes, and also practices. So the scenario-based learning resources allow us to get an idea of how their practices in the schools are, as much as it's not the same as observing in class, but they do give us an indication of how they do apply these practices. And then we do have some evaluation data, which I talked about earlier. So like any feedback on how they think we should be improving the platform in general. And then, so this is the engagement level. So we onboarded 825 participants I talked about, and these were from 231 schools. We had targeted around 250 schools, but we managed to onboard 231 schools, and this onboarding was done in person. So some schools did not come, but yeah, we were still within the number that we were targeting. And as you can see, out of these 825, we had 70% that completed the module. So only 14% did not manage to complete the modules. And so now going to the findings, so we wanted to first understand between the 2 components, remote coaching phone calls and the communities of practice, which one drives impact more, or which one improves engagement as well. And so from what we gathered after the analysis, it's that coaching is a critical driver of engagement, because when we did the analysis, we established that participants who had gone through coaching were 0.3 times more likely to complete the program, unlike those that had not gone through the coaching process. And this coaching was being done remotely by the middle tier actors, so the district officials. We call them education officials back in Kenya. And then the other thing that you wanted to also understand is there shift in knowledge and attitudes across the participants who've gone through the Lead Now modules. And so we could see that there was increased confidence in applying the formative assessments, because the 2 modules are focusing on formative assessment, but the whole 12 modules do focus on data-driven instruction and also differentiated instruction. So we decided to give them the formative assessment as because that's the way they're structured. So from formative, so they get the data. From the data, they reviewed the data to tailor the instruction, and now they can differentiate the instruction for the learners. So that's how we've structured, and all this was actually informed and borrowed from teaching at the right level. We've had a lot about here. Then we could also see that in terms of the knowledge gains from the data that we got from now the Lead Now application, we could see that over 30% of the participants going through all the groups recorded mastery and above. And so the way we've structured our data is that we have aligned it with the in-person model. So with the in-person model, we do have observation checklists, and these observation checklists, the way we score or rate the participants, it's that we have 4 different ratings, and these ratings would be like from a level 1 to a level 4. So level 1, you can see that these participant does not have any knowledge of what the practice is all about. But maybe a level 2, you can see that this participant knows what, they have an idea of the concept or the skill that you're looking at, but they do need to be trained. So a level 3 would be, they do have mastery of these practice, but they need to be coached. And right now, that's the level that we always target, a level 3, who is now a teacher or an instructional leader who we say has mastered the skill. And so when you see all that, that's basically what it means. And at level 4, which is more someone who's exceeding expectations, this is someone who is now able to share, or there is peer learning that this participant or this individual is able to share or influence the practices of other individuals in the school. And then the last thing is in terms of the practices. So within the 3 or 4 months, we're able to also conduct observations, so in-person observations for a sample of the group. And from what we observed, it's that the instructional leaders and the teachers, there was also gains in how they're using these practices in the schools. So for the instructional leaders who are looking at, are they conducting classroom observations, which is one of the responsibilities that they go into the classrooms and see how the teachers are applying the practices. And we can see from the results that that there was a shift as well. The time shocked me. Yeah, so there was a shift in their practices, and even with the teachers, there was also a shift again. So what did we learn? We learned that for future tests, we need to think about the scope. We tested 2 components at a time. For future tests, we'd want to test one at a time, right? And also the question for us has been, do we test to see that the intervention is working versus testing to see whether it's working for a bigger group? There's a difference between the two that we also learned while at it. And then the other thing is robust monitoring and evaluation framework, that we need to have a rigorous one so that we can see any deviations in the program, because we expected that coaching would be provided to the entire group, but then we realized that only a section of the group that, or one of the counties, it's where the coaching was provided, and in the other county, we didn't have the education officers providing the coaching. So that, if closely monitored, would have been able to control it immediately. And then comparison group. So you realize we did not have a comparison group. And so for future tests, we want to include a control group as well. And lastly, data dashboards. So data is important, and we need to think about how we design the dashboards in our application, so that the education officers and the instructional leaders do have access to data for their daily support to schools.
Thanks, Nancy. We can pick up some more of that in the Q&A. So now I'm going to hand over to Claire Cullen from Youth Impact.
Well done. Great. Thank you so much, Sabina. Hi, everyone. My name is Claire Cullen. I am the Head of Research and Innovation at Youth Impact, and I'm presenting joint work that was a collective effort of many people, but this paper is titled Optimizing Education, Evidence from 10 A/B Tests. So at Youth Impact, we do a lot of A/B testing. We've been doing it for a number of years, where we rapidly randomize and then assess all of our programs every school term repeatedly. So I'm just going to give you a bit of context into how this fits into the broader social sector. So there are obviously many challenges that we've heard a lot about over the past couple of days on growing this robust evidence base on what works. So while there's a growing movement for rigorous evaluation, it's still really rare. So in the UK, less than 10% of programs are rigorously evaluated, and even fewer of those are assessed on cost effectiveness. In education specifically, there is a growing body of evidence on, as we've heard, the efficacy bubble, but then there is a lot of challenges in taking this to scale. And so there's a lot of authors in this room who've contributed to this evidence. And this is not only a problem, obviously, in education. This applies broadly across the social sector. So given these challenges, there's a need for more and faster and rigorous evidence in the social sector as programs are going to scale, so they can avoid this like voltage drop as they try and go from this like hothouse intensively monitored pilot. And A/B testing is one tool that can be used to help meet that need. So A/B testing is a really common approach in the tech sector, as we've heard a bit about, where they might be randomizing a customer to see one version of a program, of a product versus another, and then they're optimizing on these short-term outcomes like clicks or maybe purchases. And then they're obviously finding such high returns from this, so they estimate maybe like 10 to 25% revenue growth in a year. So these organizations are typically running thousands of randomized experiments at any point in time. So in Youth Impact, we took these principles and have been applying it internally across all of our programs. There's obviously different definitions and understandings of A/B testing, so I just wanted to share some principles that we've been using internally to understand it. So like randomized control trials, A/B testing is rigorous. So there's a coin flip involved, and by randomizing, we can be confident that any differences that we're observing are causal differences because of the modification that we're testing. A/B testing in Youth Impact is rapid. So the objective is like rapid real-time decision making. So the results have to be turned around really quickly within a couple of weeks of end line. And unlike maybe a longer term RCT where you're measuring long-term outcomes, maybe it's like school dropout or test scores in a couple of years on the exam. Here we're trying to measure learning that changes within 1 or 2 months. It's also regular. So A/B testing in Youth Impact is like really baked into our existing M&E systems. It's done as a matter of course. We know we're going to be doing many of them successively. It just kind of lowers the stakes. And each time it's meant to be improving cost effectiveness. So here's a figure that can show you a little bit about just these 3 R principles. So they're rigorous. There's always a coin flip. We randomly assign group A to get just the status quo version of the program, and group B, a slightly modified version that's meant to improve the program. We come back, we measure learning. Just after the implementation is over, we adopt the most effective version, and so on and so forth, and rinse and repeat. And this might take place over the course of 1 school year. So we have been doing this for a number of years. So Youth Impact was founded 10 years ago when we ran a randomized control trial. And that was over, obviously took a couple of years to do, but we didn't want that to be the end of learning. We wanted to be learning a lot faster than a few years. And so then we adopted this A/B testing approach. And you can see in the light blue dots is our A/B tests, and the green dots are our randomized control trials, which we've done when we needed some efficacy tests. And at this point in time, we've now done 53 cumulatively, 53 A/B tests or randomized control trials. And this just shows, I guess, that it's like baked in now. Everybody in the organization knows it's a matter of course, and it's a really key tool for learning quickly. So let me give you an example from an education program, a targeted instruction program we have in Botswana. So this program is based on the principles from teaching at the right level. So it's targeted instruction. We have lots of evidence that that works from many countries, from many people in this room as well. And so we know that it works across countries, across implementer types, across different times of the school day and school year. And so here we wanted to, with this program, test it at the household level. So this targeted instruction program was developed during COVID when we couldn't do TARL in person. And so it was TARL principles, assessing what kids know over the phone, and then giving them one-on-one weekly phone tutorials and a weekly SMS at the level that they're at. And we've actually scaled this and tested this with many people in this room. And so now that we've done multiple randomized control trials, seven and counting, we are really confident that it seems to be working across contexts and implementer types and are trying to scale this up globally. So now we're in scaling or have tested it in 10 or more countries. We have MOUs with governments in several countries to scale it up through the government system and have run lots of experiments. But we really want to avoid this efficacy amazingness and then dropping the voltage drop as we scale. So that's why we've been baking in this A/B testing. So the sample that I'm going to show you is from 10 A/B tests that have been conducted in Botswana over the past 14 months or so. Total sample size is 11,500 students. And these regions are Botswana's 6 of the country's 10 regions, and these are by far the most populous regions. So you can think of this sample as broadly representative. The median grade for kids is 4, and yes, average age is 9. So I'm also going to be in the paper, we break down our innovations into two types of innovation. So the first is an effectiveness increasing innovation. So here what we're trying to do is test like a slightly juiced up version of the program that we think is going to make it a bit more effective. So we measure, all of our A/B tests are measuring learning. So we randomly assign half of the kids to get the status quo, half to get this slightly boosted version. We come back, we measure learning, and then we adopt the most effective version as our new status quo. The next type of innovation is a cost-reducing innovation. And here what we're doing is trying to ideally find like no difference in learning, but a much cheaper version of the program. So here what we're doing is we randomly assign half to get status quo, half to get a slightly cheaper version, and then if we find no difference in learning, we'll adopt the cheapest version. So let me share some results from two specific examples. I can't go into 10 in this time. But first, the first is the effectiveness increasing example. So here we get most of our best A/B test ideas from the implementers, and they told us that the best calls are the ones where the caregivers are actively involved in the instruction. The calls just go much smoother and they get more invested. And so in group A, the status quo, and then in group B, we encouraged caregivers to actively take over leading the instruction in the second half of the phone call. And so what did we find? You can see here the results from 6 of our effectiveness increasing tests. And so the results are reported in standard deviations. It's showing difference in learning outcomes between group A and group B. The standard deviations are shown here, just to the left of the parentheses. And anytime the dot and whisker goes through the 0, there's no difference in learning. So for the one I just told you about, in the red box, you can see there's a 0.24 standard deviation difference in learning between these two groups. So this is on top of an already effective program. And 0.24, just for a rule of thumb, that's double the median effect size of an education intervention. So just this tiny little tweak at changing the second half of the phone call of an already effective program doubled the impact of the program on average. So that's just huge. And that's by far, that's our most effective effectiveness increasing test. The others, I'd say 3 out of these 6, we found statistically significant differences in learning. So giving you a cost-reducing example, our typical model is having the same tutor making all of the calls, but it's a lot of work for us to match the facilitator or the tutor to the household. They have to spend a lot of time scheduling, like calling back, trying again. And so the implementers told us this is like a really high friction part of their job, and it also costs a lot of time in salary and airtime to make this arrangement. So we tried a modification to reduce the cost of the program by allowing anyone to call the household each time. So essentially you have a different facilitator each week. So we tested SAME, our status quo model, versus allowing anyone to call the child. And what did we find? So this intervention, unlike the previous one, it's a bit counterintuitive, but we hope to find them crossing the 0 line. That tells us there's no difference in learning. And so here, you can see very successfully having a different tutor did not reduce learning relative to the status quo. So I guess those are great things to see. How do they compare to the default at that point in time? So we find really large efficiency gains from this program and this approach. So just for this same tutor versus different tutor, having a different tutor has a reduction in cost for our program of $4.27. So that's a 17% efficiency gain, which is really large. And then for our effectiveness increasing test, we found across the board up to a 33% boost in efficiency. So I just want to reiterate this. I can't imagine a world where we hadn't done these tests and wouldn't have discovered this. But maybe you think that these are obvious, and maybe we could have known that in advance. So, or maybe the teachers would have known that, and they could have told us what the results would be. But no, we measured priors and posteriors to measure teachers' beliefs about the impact of the program and the deviation. And here you can see in light blue the implementers' beliefs before the program versus afterwards. And this is for the test where we have the different implementers. So in the blue, you can see that the implementers think that having a different tutor is going to reduce learning. And you can see afterwards that they update their beliefs to the truth, and they get more certain that actually it's not going to reduce learning to have a different implementer each week. So I guess the key headline here is that intuition isn't enough actually, and that this experimentation and the certainty that comes with the rigor really does make a difference. So just in conclusion, I've shown you Youth Impact's 3 simple principles of A/B testing. They're rigorous, rapid, and regular. They can be bucketed into 2 types of innovations, effectiveness increasing or cost reducing. We found that A/B testing significantly increased efficiency and cost effectiveness and boosted the scalability of our targeted instruction program. And some of these innovations reduced costs by 18% without reducing impact at all, and others doubled the program's impact. And yeah, I guess just a reflection, it seems like a missed opportunity if we hadn't, it's just hard to imagine a world where we hadn't done this testing. And so I guess in recognition of that, I just wanted to give a plug. So with lots of support from funders in this room, we have been doing these A/B tests internally, and then we have new funding to support other organizations to conduct A/B testing as well. So please do reach out to me or Amanda Beatty, who's in this room too, or on our website if you want support running A/B testing in your organization. Thank you.
Great, thanks so much, Claire, that was great. Our next speaker is Dewey Susanti from Global School Leaders. So I'll hand over to her, thanks.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. It's good to be here. Waiting for the slide. Okay. Yeah. So I am here on behalf of the school leaders and my co-authors, Tejas Airodi, Gautam Anand, and Abhinav Ghosh. So at Global School Leaders, we believe that excellent schools begin with excellent leaders. And essentially what we're trying to do is to identify what are the high leverage actions that can be trainable, and then kind of like work with partner organizations on the ground to try to also focus on how we can support networks and school leaderships within the countries. We believe that these actions would improve school and teaching practices, as well as improving student outcomes. So we have supported over 13,000 school leaders in Global South countries, and this particular presentation will focus on India and Indonesia. So we know that effective school leadership could improve student outcomes, but we don't know yet in which particular focus of the training would be the most effective. Our recent evidence review show that the way school leaders affect student outcomes is through teachers. Right? This can be done by shaping teaching practices, fostering teamwork among teachers, as well as boosting teacher satisfaction. Whereas on the specific training content, there's still like a lot of uncertainty. So then we asked 2 questions, right? One is that how can we train school leaders directly and see if the impact will trickle down to students over time. And so we're doing an RCT in India currently to look into this program over 3 years. But then the second question that we're asking is, how can we actually leverage a program that have been implemented and proven to be more or less effective at the teacher level? And so that's where we come into the differentiated learning approaches that have been largely effective. And it's great that I come after Claire, because she has done like all the introduction on the literature. So essentially, we have been doing iterative testing of school leader role in implementing these differentiated learning approaches. The first study actually piggybacked on the Connected that was implemented in India by our partner Allokit. And there, what was implemented is individual targeting through phone tutoring during the pandemic. This was implemented over 8 weeks in 14 schools. And then we replicated that program in Indonesia with our partner Inspirasi through what we call an accelerasi pilot. And this is also focusing on foundational numeracy. But because at that time, the schools were just coming out of COVID, we tested 2 different models where in addition to the individual targeting, there was also the group targeting. The pilot ran over 8 weeks in 25 schools. And then we scaled the group targeting model to an RCT for that ran over like 1 full academic year with the 9 months being much more low touch compared to the first 3 months. And this was implemented in 300 schools with 2 treatment arms. So all of the study was a mixed method research design with high frequency monitoring. The connected RCT focused more on the teacher training on individual targeting through phone tutoring. The school leader did not participate in the training, but included them as part of the implementation. So then, like in Akselerasi pilot, we tested 4 different groups, Group A and Group B, trained the teacher on differentiated learning in group. And then for Group B, in addition to that, they were asked to conduct individual tutoring for students who perform below, kind of like at the lowest level. And like every 2 weeks, this is being monitored. So then for Group C and D, the school leaders were also trained. In Akselerasi RCT, we then kind of like scale up the version where the teacher training focus more on the differentiated group learning. And so we compared this with the treatment where the school leaders were also trained and compare with the control group. So we combined this with the qualitative research to understand the mechanisms and pathways to improve effectiveness. This particular presentation focused more on the qualitative study and findings. So in connected RCT, essentially we sampled all the school leaders. We conducted semi-structured interviews with all of them. And the teachers were selected based on the implementation fidelity and student outcomes data. So we were like looking at the above average, average, and below average. We conducted interviews with all of them, as well as the key stakeholders on the ground. In Akselerasi pilot, the sampling focused more on 2 school leaders from each of the 4 groups based on administrative student outcomes, above average and below average, and 2 teachers from each school. This is focusing on grade 3 and 4 in math. So we conducted, again, like semi-structured interviews with all of them, and we complemented this as well with observation of the school leaders after they conducted classroom observations of the teacher. For the Akselerasi RCT, we conducted sampling of 6 school leaders for each of the 2 districts based on implementation fidelity data, again, like above average, average and below average, and conducted semi-structured interview and observations in 12 classrooms. So we have 4 key findings, but we're afraid that we have a lot more follow-up questions. So the first finding is school leaders' ability to enhance implementation fidelity is contingent upon their capacity and motivation. So in the Akselerasi pilot, we tested 4 different groups where Group C and D were supported by trained school leaders. What we saw was that teachers who were supported here were more compliant in inputting the student assessment data on bi-weekly basis. However, in Akselerasi RCT, we continued this kind of like high frequency monitoring, and we found that the average difference between treatment 1, where only teachers were trained, with treatment 2, where in addition to that, the school leaders were also trained, the average were not statistically different, and then also they decline at the same rate over the 1-year program. So this declining trend occurred despite different monitoring data collection methods, and we also incentivized the data input. So for both connected RCT and Akselerasi pilot, the data collection was done utilizing Google Forms and along with reminders through WhatsApp groups that was sent by the facilitators. And so the data that was collected focused on student attendance and math progress over every week for connected and every 2 weeks for the Akselerasi pilot. In the Akselerasi RCT, because the number of students going up to above 7,000, it would become impossible and very challenging to collect data using Google Forms. So we developed a tech platform that was based on open source software, And this is customized to focus on a dialogue-based data input done by the teacher through Discord. So teachers just click through kind of like the options for the student outcomes, and then they got reminders, and the whole implementation was incentivized. So every time teachers access the learning management system, when they share sort of like best practices or like challenges that they encounter during implementation through the online community of practice, as well as when they upload data, they basically get points. So it's a gamified version of a learning for teachers. And essentially every month we focus on different challenges for the teachers and school principals. And for every cohort of 25 schools, the top 10 get some gimmicks. This is like really small things that's focusing on sort of like giving more of a like social recognition. So the incentives initially work to motivate implementation and particularly data collection. But when more efforts were required from them, the kind of like the effort also dropped. So what we found is that most school leaders also struggle more than teachers with technology, and as well with the time that it requires to implement the sort of like support for the teachers. And so the questions that we have is like, how do we balance the need for high frequency student data monitoring, which is really crucial for differentiated learning programs at scale, with the capacity of the teachers and school leaders on the ground. We also found that in Connected, the schools that perform well on the program outcomes, which are all the blue schools, the school leaders tend to already had a positive attitude. Initially, they were initially excited about the program. They had a clear understanding of why it was being done, and they wanted to continue in the future, right? So then for us, it's more like a question of how can program implementation improve the participants' motivation and really keep it going. So this is like a big challenge for us when we think about scaling. So the second finding is that the school leaders really need a mix of instructional and managerial support. So when the Connected study was implemented, the school leaders supported more on the implementation, focusing on monitoring and implementation fidelity. Whereas in Akselerasi pilot, the school leaders were actually trained on instructional leadership. So this is focusing more on providing classroom observation and giving feedback, right? But then what we found during the qualitative research was that the school leaders were actually struggling. So they were given some questions that they could ask teachers for during this classroom observation and feedback. But then when teachers gave them some challenges, they were not really, like they couldn't problem solve for the teachers. And so this created a lot of challenges as well. And the teachers felt like the school leaders couldn't help them, right? So this is where we realized that demanding school leaders to become instructional leaders is not like an easy kind of switch. We actually require a need to scaffold their learning. We need to kind of like also provide them with more managerial soft skills to actually learn and listen and kind of like problem solve as well. So in Akselerasi RCT, we added the managerial as well as a growth mindset component because the teachers were also like thinking that students couldn't progress because of the way they kind of like conceive math to be. And so basically the questions that we have is that more in a context where the school leaders are more familiar with administrative leadership, how can we shift kind of like this process, right, for them to become instructional leaders, but also balance between the two skills. So the third finding that we have is that school leaders encounter challenges in observing a classroom and providing feedback to teachers. Most of the challenges come more in terms of finding the time. But what we saw is that the low observation frequency also lead to low instructional support and low effectiveness on the implementation of the differentiated learning. School leaders also, when they do have time, they do not provide kind of like the feedback that is needed by the teachers, as I mentioned earlier. So there were like a lot of quite some challenges as well that was encountered because the training was also very short. School leaders struggle between inserting their authority and giving teacher autonomy. So what we found was that school leaders were actually not sure if they can go into the classroom unless the teachers actually invite them to, right? So this is more like when school leaders need to provide instructional leadership for their teachers, how can they do so without kind of like being intrusive of teachers' autonomy? So thinking about like providing like different person in the school, right, would be quite useful in that context. So the final finding is contextual challenges, obviously affecting school leadership and disrupt teaching and learning. We found as well, similar to what Tahir mentioned yesterday, that school leader transfer massively disrupt an academic year. So in the Akselerasi RCT over 1 year, around 41% school leaders were transferred, similar to our study in India with Todd. And so this is really challenging when we think about doing intervention or reform, even within kind of like the academic calendar year. In addition to that, school holidays and extended breaks also disrupted student learning. So essentially, a lot of the students were like getting all these different type of activities to the extent that 2 of the 9 months of implementation in 1 year were actually disrupted by all these holidays. So we have not evaluated the impact on the student outcomes for Akselerasi. The question for us is more like, how can education ecosystem be more aligned to optimize teaching and learning in school? So I will leave you with this summary of key findings, and thank you so much.
Great, thank you so much, Dewey. So now for our final speaker, I'm going to hand over to Rebecca Daltrey from the EdTech Hub. Thank you.
Hi everyone, it's good to be here and join these speakers today. So I'm representing EdTech Hub, which hopefully will pop up behind me. We're a global research consortium, all focused on education technology. And today I'm going to be presenting to you about a multi-strand research study we've been conducting in partnership with our implementing partner, IDU. I believe on the CEO and Aidan, there we go, hi guys. Aidan, who's head of data and learning, also here, so please do go to them for lots of questions as well. We've been working in partnership with them, implementing a digital personalised learning tool in Kenya, and also our research partners, Women Educational Researchers of Kenya as well. And what I want to do today is, I can only really share a snapshot of this work. It began in 2022 as part of EdTech Hub's FCDO-funded mandate to empower people to make, by giving them the evidence they need to make decisions about technology and education. And since then, it's grown and expanded through support from Founders Pledge, through support from the Gates Foundation, into these multiple different strands of research that I'll introduce today. I'll share a snapshot of some of the findings, but what I really want to do is think about, what does this implementation research really teach us about how we can interrogate personalised learning in a more specific way? How can we actually start to dig down into what elements of it are underpinning learning outcomes beyond just kind of some of the broad claims that are being made? So to situate the research a little bit, there are a vast number of different definitions for personalised learning tools, including this one here from Van Schools and colleagues that we've been using. It really is a broad umbrella, and that there are a number of different ways in which people are conceptualizing this. And broadly, it talks about a digital learning tool that adapts or personalizes to the individual learner to optimize some kind of outcome. But this looks very different in different contexts, different types of tools. And therefore, yeah, there's a lot of variety and comparison is difficult. There are some key themes in the literature. EdTech Hub conducted a rapid evidence review prior to this research and a meta-analysis as well. And it did show that broadly, the literature is saying that these are effective for learning outcomes, particularly tools which are more complex adaptivity,
built into them. But there were two key evidence gaps identified. So firstly, the majority of research is being conducted in high-income contexts. So a lot more focus is needed on the conditions required to have effective implementation in low and middle income contexts. But also secondly, and this is something I'll really focus on today, that a lot of the research is focused on supplementary models of digital personalized learning. So what I mean by this is models which are implemented outside of regular classroom instruction. It might be an after-school club, it might be as a direct substitute for the teacher. But there's very little evidence on what it looks like to actually implement these within the classroom, within the education system, and the impact of that. So that really became the focus of our research study. Our overarching question is about how can a classroom integrated digital personalized learning tool most effectively support early grade numeracy and literacy outcomes in Kenya. And as I say, this kind of grew and has grown into multiple strands of research over the past couple of years. And we're focusing on different aspects of its implementation. So firstly, we've got this pedagogical strand of research. We've been doing design-based research, particularly working with teachers, co-learning with them. Started with focusing on pre-primary classrooms, and we're now looking at early grade primary as well. Secondly, learning outcomes. What impact is this having? Two randomized control trials, the first one in pre-primary and currently a pilot RCT in lower primary as well. And then also looking at the software. Okay, so what is happening within the software? What kind of personalization is effective? What different features might affect these tools? I can go a lot more into the detail. There's a lot of methodology going on here, so I'm happy to talk more about it afterwards. But here's a kind of overview of that. So the design-based research, we've run multiple different mixed methods work, particularly, as I said, focused in teachers. A co-learning process as well with them, iteratively exploring different ways of integrating this tool into classrooms with them, and learning from them and with them. The RCT, which I'll focus on today, is the pre-primary RCT. So this involved a final sample of 291 schools, 1,995 learners, randomly assigned into a treatment and control group. We had 3 assessment points using the IDELA assessment tool, over four school terms of implementation, so assessing the impact over that period. And then finally, the ABN testing, which we've been doing, which is looking at the software. We've been testing 9 different features, 9 different designs within the tool. These encompass different algorithms, looking at different features which might feed the data back to teachers, looking at different kind of visualizations or features on the tool that can support teachers and learners. So yeah, 9 different tests there as well. I obviously can't share findings from all of this in 15 minutes, so I'll provide a snapshot, particularly focused on the RCT, but then thinking about how can we interpret those findings from the RCT, from the other research that we've been doing, and thinking about how it's embedded within education system. A bit more about I do. Please do talk to these guys for more details. I'm sure they'd love to. But key things to note about this tool. So firstly, it is an app that's installed on low-cost Android phones, and a couple, 1 or 2 currently in the pre-primary version being delivered to per classroom and shared amongst learners in the classroom. On the app, it involves two main interfaces. So one for the teacher. This provides digitized lesson plans from the broader Tayari Structured Pedagogy Programme. So the teacher can engage with those lesson plans, and then that's all aligned to and mapped to the digital personalized learning content that the learners engage with on the tool. So this is all mapped to Kenya's competency-based curriculum, and when the teacher has finished a lesson plan, that can align with what lesson content or learning content the learners can then engage with on the device. The personalization built into this, it's all built on each individual learner's unique interaction history with the device. It's built to optimize the content sequencing, so on what order all the different exercises appear for the learners in order to maximize their engagement. But it's also important to note the way in which the teacher can also feed into this personalization process both in the way that they distribute it amongst learners in the classroom, but also in the way the substrand of learning is selected each day. I would say one of the kind of overarching learnings, I think, from this research has been how important having an open, critical dialogue is in implementation research. Education research is messy. I think we're all aware of that. And what's been great is working with IDO to interrogate that messiness, not try and put it in a box, control it, but actually think, okay, if we're embedding this into classrooms, let's interrogate what that looks like. Let's explore all those different facets. Particularly because IDO is scaling. And so thinking about the speed at which research takes alongside the speed at which scaling is happening, being really kind of aware of that and digging into that and learning and kind of iterating as we go along. So results. Firstly, from the pre-primary RCT, this has revealed a statistically significant effect on pre-primary learning outcomes, an overall effect of 0.534 standard deviations. That's comparing from baseline to end line across 4 school terms of implementation. Similar effect sizes for numeracy and literacy as well. Significantly no gendered impact, which is really encouraging. There was significant effect for both boys and girls, but no difference between the two. One of the things we noticed in the literature is there are a number of different personalized learning tools that claim to support or have a greater impact for learners who have a lower baseline level of learning prior to the intervention. That's something we saw in terms of numeracy, in terms of this RCT. So the lowest performing 25% of learners at baseline had statistically significant gains compared to the highest 25%, but not for literacy, sorry. So that's something we're going to continue to look into. And another thing we've noticed, which I think is something, having four terms of implementation was interesting to see, was that there was a trail-off in effect in the second half of the intervention. So the effect size between baseline and midline was 0.51, but between midline and end line was 0.068. So there is this potential drop-off in effect after a certain period of implementation. Now, there could be many reasons for this, and actually one thing we've noticed is that it could be due to content exhaustion. So the tool itself is indicating that the learners had kind of finished all of the content soon after midline, and therefore that could be one of the indications for why there was this drop-off. But it's something we need to look into more. How do these tools, can they sustain learning gains over time? So those are the findings, or a brief overview of the findings from the RCT. That can tell us that it seems to work, but I think what we want to continue to investigate is what is working, what features of the tool are working, and that's where all the other strands of our research are coming in. So to provide a little snapshot of those, one of the A/B tests we've been doing has been really focused on the personalization algorithms themselves. So we designed a test with 2 different algorithms which personalize, one to optimize for engagement, one to optimize for score, and then a non-personalized approach as well. Both of the personalization algorithms were statistically significant. They had a strong impact. However, between the 2 of them, they significantly impacted different kinds of learning domains. So they didn't have the same impact. They were affecting, say, one was affecting, I'm trying to break down now, number identification, for example. One had more of an impact on that than the other, or in terms of literacy, letter recognition. There were a whole variety. And so I think we need to be really careful about making broad claims that personalization is the solution in just as a broad brush term. Clearly, different algorithms can affect learning in different ways, and we want to continue to look into that. Secondly, distribution of the tool. This tool is being embedded in classrooms. It is used throughout the school day at the discretion of the teacher. And one of the things we've noticed from our design-based research is the challenge of that. Teachers were frequently saying that they're giving the tool to those whom they term fast learners, more than other learners. So those who finish other classroom activities first, they are naturally getting more opportunities to engage with it. So that's something we're continuing to look at and engage with. How do you increase the quality of use of the tool? That shows how important the teacher is in this, in embedding it in classrooms. But another aspect of our work has shown the importance of the teacher in feeding into the personalization itself. So another of the A/B tests we've done gave the teachers the opportunity to override the AI suggested content and select a different substrand. And when you gave teachers that opportunity, it significantly improved learning outcomes. So actually, how can that collaboration between the teacher and the tech support learning? It seems to be a really significant avenue there. So what? I think the things I would take away from, or would like you to take away from today is firstly, this particular tool and classroom integrated model is really promising. There are things we're continuing to dig into together. There's a whole sort of black box of data that we can continue to match with the RCT in terms of all of the data that IDO's tool itself produces. So we're going to continue to do that. How do you match the face-to-face assessment that we've done alongside the assessment data that it itself produces? Thinking more about that trail-off effect, thinking more about what this looks like in terms of lower primary, which is what we're currently doing. Does it transfer? Do the same principles transfer? But I think the other things that this has really taught us is that we need to start being more specific about talking about digital personalized learning. There is not one single approach to personalization. There are many. And I think when we're talking about the impact of these tools, we really encouraging the whole community really to start pinpointing exactly what is personalizing for whom, how, and starting to be more transparent about that. And then thirdly, the importance of the teacher. I'll echo exactly what Nancy said in our first presentation. The teacher, it's just seems shown to be so fundamental to the way in which we can actually embed this in classrooms, and the way in which it can be utilized and optimized, both to support their own teaching, but also to support learning outcomes. And so we'd really encourage involving the teachers in the research, so that we can align lots of different aspects and types of data and types of perspectives in the work that we're doing. Thank you very much. Love to chat more after.
Great. Well, thank you so much. They were really, really interesting presentations. And I was kind of really interested in the what. So the kind of the school leadership research, the coaching experience, the personalized learning, which we all know are, very much linked with a lot of the evidence based on what works to get kids learning, especially coaching and school leadership, some of those best buys, structured pedagogy, teaching at the right level. So it's really interesting to kind of hear more about the what as well as the how. So the different research approaches that helped kind of tease out these learnings. And I think that the really helpful lots of A/B testing going on was really nice to kind of bring that to life and explain how you've been doing this to kind of optimize your intervention. So thank you so much. I guess one big takeaway from me listening to all of this is that while it's really crucial when we're kind of testing and optimizing interventions that we're focused on how they improve learning outcomes, practically speaking, that's not the only thing that we need to be thinking about. And I think there's lots of important issues around sustainability and how embedded those interventions are likely to be in government systems so that they're going to be successful in the long run, and also equity considerations as well. And so, I really liked Youth Impact's terminology of effectiveness increasing innovations and then cost reducing innovations. And I was also wondering if we need another innovation around some of those kind of broader sustainability factors like government ownership or the likelihood of them continuing after the implementer maybe steps back. And that equity increasing innovation as well, I think would be really interesting to make sure that some of these are really delivering for the most marginalized children in the classroom. And we might need different tools to do that. I think we heard a lot about quite rigorous approaches, maybe not, well, some randomized controlled trials, but then some of these rigorous quasi-experimental designs. But I'm also really interested what else we need to be doing, like qualitative research, ethnographic research, political economy analysis, to be kind of teasing out some of this. And I hope that's something that the Hub can help with over time. And I'd love to hear colleagues' thoughts about that, but I won't abuse my position as chair too much. So anyway, open up for questions. Does anyone in the room have questions? I think we'll try and take 3 or so, and then we'll, bunch them. Yeah, so first over here. Oh, great, thank you.
Hey, thank you so much. Beatrice from Georgetown University. I have a question mostly for Claire, but that might be relevant for everybody, which is about the sort of timeline of measurement, right? Because I don't think of learning as a 2 or 3 week process necessarily. And so I was wondering, first of all, how you're measuring learning outcomes exactly in your very quick turnaround experiments. And also, have you used other inputs or the short-term metrics, right? So going back to your sort of Silicon Valley analogy on the A/B testing is like, well, what they're optimizing is profits, but they don't really measure profits in their A/B testing, right? Because that's not something that's like a 2-3 week thing. They have like other short-term metrics. So I was wondering, how do you measure learning outcomes on a short-term thing? And then do you have any other metrics that you've used that you think may or may not be predictive of learning outcomes in the longer run, right?
Great, thanks so much. We'll take 2 other questions in the room.
Thank you. I have a question, if I may, in relation to Becky's presentation, the final one, but actually directed at IDU, who were the implementing partner. Really keen to hear their reflections on, as a digital personalized learning organization, what it was like working in such close partnership with researchers. What were the pros and the cons of that and the consequences?
Great. Very interesting question. And just at the back.
Amanda Beatty, Youth Impact. So first, a question for Nancy around take-up. I think you mentioned that you have around like 40% take-up. So how are you thinking about that kind of in relation to your costs, your impact, and are you thinking of ways to improve take-up? And then second, a question for Dewi, which is, this seems like such a massive mountain to climb to get principals to be coaches. And so have you thought of like other ways of trying to support teachers in terms of coaching, like peer coaching or other things? Or do you think this system is just structured this way and this is kind of the only option for school leaders?
Great, thanks so much. Okay, we'll take those questions to start with, and then do you want to,
So I'll start with the question. So the take-up is actually 70%, not 40. I'm sorry if I said that. Yeah, but I know the take-up is one thing, but the implementation in the schools is another. So what we do is, part of the model is we have the professional learning communities, which is now to make sure that these skills are embedded into the school system. And then we also have support from the middle tier actors who are meant to now check on the implementation of the practices. So we have the overall education officials who are now the middle tier actors who are looking at the schools at that level. But then within the school, you have the instructional leaders who are now supporting the teachers. Yes, so.
Great, thanks. Claire, do you want to take the?
Yeah, sure. So thanks so much for the question. We do a lot of thinking about how to make sure that the outcomes that we're optimizing for are ones that we really care about. So we definitely don't want to be optimizing on, I think tech sector has to grapple with this a lot, on accidentally optimizing on one thing and then it having unintended consequences elsewhere. Fortunately for us, learning does change. I think the Pratham rule is 1 level per 10 days or something. We definitely find learning changes very quickly. So we do measure learning. So the program is about 8 weeks of weekly calls, and then we do N-line like a week or 2 after the intervention. And so that's when we're measuring learning. For our health program, where we do still A/B test, like the program, I guess one of the outcomes is like school dropout and pregnancy. And so there, that takes like 9 months to be visible. And so it's a lot harder there. We have to do a lot of careful thinking about the theory of change and what are like good, reliable predictors of this end outcome that we want to optimize for. But yeah, for education, we could just straight up do learning. And we find that changes. Yeah.
Great. Julie, do you want to?
Yeah, so for the student learning as well, we collected data on kind of like the numeracy result, similar to what Connected was doing. But then we also collected more like sort of like outcome indicators. So knowing like whether the teachers also like already implemented the differentiated learning sessions, sort of like also looking into whether the school principals conducted the implementation of the classroom observation. So to Amanda's question on the coaching, in the past 3 years, we have been like looking more at school leaders as coaches, but indeed like going forward, we are now looking into ways how coaching can be provided to teachers. So in fact, we're currently designing a program on early childhood and school leadership, where we work with organization where they are able to also conduct a sort of like mentor by the peer who have implemented the program. So they also work with district government that have already also like appointed mentors. So we will be also like trying to see and compare it with mentorship by the school leaders. So we're trying different things as well to see which would be more effective for teachers.
Great, thanks so much. And then the EdTech question to Idu, sorry.
I'll, with slight nervousness, hand over to Idu to talk about what it was like working with us.
We could have a mic, thanks.
Sure, thank you. So Aidan Friedberg from IDO. Yeah, so I would say that the biggest thing that we kind of learned from it was there's a different speed that researchers work and that we work at. So obviously we've been doing A/B testing for a while in product development, yeah, it was really useful to see the different approaches, and I think it also was very useful to see, you know, to have a research partner that wasn't just running RCT, but actually was embedded in every aspect. So going into the classroom, thinking about design, going under the kind of black box of the data, and doing the RCT itself. And I think for us, it's a key part of, you know, by not just doing A/B testing for tech development, but actually how do we open up to the wider community? How do we learn from the wider community and also hopefully share knowledge from our side? I think that's a critical part of our theory of change as well. And you know, I think it creates transparency, accountability, all of these kind of important things when working with vulnerable populations. And so maybe I would also use the opportunity that I have the mic to turn it into a question.
Go for it.
And you know, but the final thing I would say is that I think that's how we see our roles as a little bit working with the community, and we're trying to scale and figuring out how do we bring the knowledge of the community into the communities that we're scaling into. But maybe my question is for Claire and Youth Impact, then, because obviously we've been doing a lot of A/B testing. It seems like you have quite a long history as well. And obviously you gave an example of this, very good example of the 0.24 SD impact that you had in the A/B test. And so I think for the theory of change, the key part is this cumulative effect, right? This compound effect of growth in learning outcomes. And so I wonder, even if it's not that every test is that significant, even if it's like a tenth of the significance, that is like 0.02 SD, over 52 tests, you would expect from when you started testing to when you ended to have like a whole SD more impact at the end. And I wonder, it seems like you're in a good position to validate this cumulative impact. So for us, we definitely see this cumulative impact, and I think we can measure it. And I wonder if, are you able to see that as well over this kind of long history? Thank you.
Great, thanks so much. And just before Claire comes back on that, I've got a couple of other questions from colleagues online. So one is to Rebecca on whether you can share a bit more on the equity dimension of the access to the digital personalised learning software. So that would be really helpful. And then, yeah, Dewey, another question for you on school leaders and whether or not they, in your experience from the work that you've been doing in these studies, and I guess more broadly, do they have enough autonomy to kind of meaningfully influence implementation based on all of their other responsibilities that they've got? So yeah, and then Claire, actually, there's another one from online, maybe you can add this in as well to your responses, just on how you managed to collect data so quickly, and if you've got any tips on that. Thanks. So yeah, Rebecca, do you want to go first, maybe?
Sure. So in terms of this equity angle, I guess this ultimately the heart of this is what I do are trying to do is implement a low cost model that isn't one-to-one device, learner to device, but sharing a few devices per classroom. And with that comes the challenge of, okay, how do you then share that amongst learners throughout the school day? And the teacher's role becomes quite important because they're choosing who gets to use it. There is a function on the device that suggests who the next learner is, but they have the opportunity to override that if it's, if they want to give it to a certain learner to support them, or if, as we've seen, a learner finishes first. And so that's what we've been looking at with the design-based research in particular. We were exploring, okay, who is getting it? If you focus on a certain learner group, what does that look like? Does that impact their learning experience more? Certainly there is a challenge in the fact that it is naturally going to certain learners first. In some ways, teachers are really positive about that because they're saying, well, they finished their other work. They're then, as they're waiting, getting more and more disruptive in the classroom, it gives them something to do. It gives them further learning opportunities. So, in some ways, teachers are seeing that as a positive. But you also then asking this question about, but is that reducing opportunities for other learners? And so we've been trialing a number of different ways in which we can tackle that. So, for example, we're currently completing analysis of dashboards that we've been looking at, feeding the data back to teachers, where you're looking at different grouping different learners and saying what these learners actually could do with more opportunities to engage with the tool, and then seeing what impact that has on the way in which teachers are distributing it and the usage amongst learners. So the whole different ways, I think it isn't one sort of simple answer. There are lots of different ways in which this works, and it ultimately comes down to, if you're trying to integrate a cost-effective method that isn't placing a massive cost burden on the government, but also is shareable and is sustainable, and you're therefore reducing the amount of tech, what is the payoff? Almost like what you're saying, what is then the payoff in terms of effectiveness, but particularly with this equality angle. So we're sort of exploring these different angles of what that might look like to kind of find that optimal balance.
Great, thank you. Dewey, do you want to come in with thoughts on?
Yeah, sure. So in the question of autonomy, we do see across the board in a lot of our studies that school leaders struggle with time because there's just a lot of demand coming from different kind of like authorities, collecting data, etc. So what we have tried to introduce within kind of like one of the high leverage action is more like looking into how can school leaders distribute leadership within schools. So then kind of like identifying a senior kind of like leadership team that it might include senior teachers that can also distribute and delegate, take over some of the time requested. But beyond that, there's also like sort of like a need, what we see is like a need for some kind of intervention or also like advocacy to the middle level management, where sort of like the recognition of when certain intervention is currently happening, then there is a need to protect kind of like time and demand for schools to be able to implement all this, right? So, but within the school itself, we do see a lot of potential autonomy for school leaders, other than kind of like all these other reforms. But time is definitely an issue, and we're like looking as well into ways how administrative tasks can be reduced using like technology in particular.
Okay, fantastic. Claire, A/B testing questions.
Yes. Awesome, great. Thank you for the question on standard deviations. Yeah, I think that's definitely a priority for us. So I guess we don't only optimize on learning, it's also on the cost effectiveness more broadly. So sometimes there might be no change in learning, but a reduction in cost. But definitely that is high on our list of priorities, is to track the cost effectiveness over time. Because like it's in our annual goals as to like every few tests leads to a large jump in cost effectiveness. So yeah, haven't done it yet, but high on our list of priorities. And then on the question of how we collect data so quickly. So we have a very large research team. So I think it's unusual. I was having this chat with someone this morning. Our research team is about 20% of our full-time staff, and half of them have PhDs, lots of research experience. And so I think just like organizationally from the top to the bottom and up, everybody is bought into the need to collect this and to like learn. We're like asking for ideas on things to test. We're like sharing results really quickly. Everybody is into this like fast learning approach. And then we know that what we're learning in our innovation hub in Botswana, we're going to translate the biggest, best innovations to like government and to scale. So I think it's like an organizational in our DNA approach. But I do think, yeah, just like we do appreciate that having a large research team is unusual, but it's worth it. It's just like these numbers speak for themselves. And so, yeah, we think it's worth it. So
Great,
yeah.
Thanks, Claire. So we've got time for another round of questions in the room. Do we have any more? Yeah, at the back and then down to Todd.
Thanks. Sally Roscorns from the Gender at the Centre initiative at IIEP. My question is for Dewi. Really interesting study. Thank you so much for the presentation. I was interested to note that you looked at differences between school leaders who had already established a good relationship with the teachers in their school and those that hadn't. And I was wondering whether you broke down the data based on any other differentiating factor in the school leader profile, for example, gender, or whether or not the school leader had themselves been or was still an active teacher. Thank you.
Great. And then, yeah, down at the front.
I am Todd Pugach from University of Buffalo. I wanted to build on this question about take-up in school management interventions. It's a common finding in this literature that take-up does tend to be low and fairly challenging. School principals are busy people and don't always have the time to prioritize these participating in these interventions. So Davey mentioned one potential approach to increase take-up, which was provide incentives, but said that could only go so far. So I'm curious from Nancy and from Davey, how should we be thinking about the optimal mix of incentives or accountability or nudges or something else to improve take-up of school management interventions?
Great, thanks so much. And then one more question at the back in the middle.
Thank you. I'm Crystal Green from 100, and my question is for Claire, but then also for others who are doing A/B testing. It sounds to me very like it's an amazing method, and it sounds very similar to other things that we like to have teachers do, like reflective practice and iterating on their own ideas. And I was really interested that you were able to capture and measure the change in the teachers' beliefs that they experienced from participating in this and seeing the data themselves. And I'm wondering how it is that you're capturing or collecting kind of the long tail of that data where their change in beliefs actually leads to long-term implementation of beyond the A/B test. But I'm really interested in how it is that are you measuring that? Are you collecting that data? And if so, how?
Great, thanks so much. And maybe I'll just add a couple extra ones from my side. So if to anyone on the panel, would love to hear about any other sorts of methodologies you're using to kind of optimize your interventions. So like political economy analysis or some more qualitative work, would really love to hear that. And then also just any reflections on how partner governments have been involved in this work. Because I know it's very, well, as implementers, you're really trying to optimize that model and often doing that for donors who are insisting on it, but sometimes the donors aren't the partner governments themselves. So I'd love to hear how you've brought partner governments on board. So yeah, do you want to, yeah, we'll go back this way. So go for it, Nancy.
Okay, so to the first question, so how are we increasing the take-up? So one of the ways we are doing it is currently, I talked about towards the end, that we are working on dashboards in-app that allow us to, so mainly what we're thinking about is what are we giving the school leaders, or what are we giving the education officials? And data was our answer, right? So how do we reduce the time that these people are taking to do their day-to-day jobs? So for the instructional leader, what data do they need to collect in the school? The data we have on our Lead Now platform, how does it help them to do their work? And so that becomes one way that we increase the motivation. So that's the current conversations that we're having, and we're already in the process of developing the dashboard to serve that. About the changes in teacher beliefs. So within the app, we're also collecting data around attitudes, but we also have anecdotals that we collect again on how that is changing over time. Then for government involvement, so we do have a technical working group that brings different representatives in the government. So at the national level, and we are able to co-create different resources, including even the content that we do put in Lead now, but also at the local level, so at the county level, like the district. So at the county level, we also do co-create together with the representatives who are now the education officials, together with the school leaders who are part of the process of developing these resources. Yeah.
Great, thanks. Claire, I think we're a bit short on time, so maybe kind of just like 2 minutes if you can.
So on teacher beliefs for our A/B testing, we measure like their beliefs before the intervention and after, kind of to see like, is there any point in doing this, or everyone already knew if it was going to work. And then, so yeah, that's just a bit more discrete by A/B test. In terms of like longer standing, what evidence we have that this might change system behavior. So in Nepal, in one of our randomized control trials of this program, we had oversubscription of teachers wanting to do it. So we had a control trial of teachers as implementers to see their changes on beliefs or practices. And we find that teachers like get very motivated when they start doing it, because you just like see it's like surprising to people that kids can learn really fast. And so they start believing in targeted instruction, saying that they're doing it in the classroom, saying that if they could choose their career again, they would choose to be a teacher, like a 16 percentage point boost in that. So there's some signs that this does change practices. We're not doing a whole lot more to measure that at the moment, but can't rule it out. And then just on Sabina's question about the government getting them on board, I think this comes a lot to the panels that we heard from yesterday, is like longstanding relationships are key for this government interaction. So in the places where we have these MOUs with government, we're helping them to scale up in the system. It's like from a longstanding relationship JPAL has with the government in Karnataka, who wanted some evidence-based education programs, and then the stars aligned, and that's how we're scaling. In the Philippines, it's like IPA's longstanding relationship and champions in government who they could identify. And so that's how we're scaling there. And in Botswana, very longstanding relationships there.
Great, thanks. Yeah.
Thanks. So for the question on whether we're disaggregating the result according to gender, so we will do that. We're still in the process of kind of like looking at all the data and across the 3 different studies. But we do kind of like also have like all the other data that from the demographic quantitative survey that we'll also like utilize to better understand the result. The question of take up, that is really indeed a very difficult aspect of it. So currently what we're seeing is that the incentive that's provided is probably too little to kind of like overcome the amount of time that is required by the school leaders. But the other part of it with regard to accountability, I think coming from a small NGO, where our partners are also like small NGO, it does kind of like the weight of the institution makes a difference in terms of getting kind of like the type of buy-in at the district government level in particular, as well as in relation to your third question, right, with the government. So whereas, for example, before when I was working with the World Bank, the kind of like the weight of the institution really makes a difference in terms of the kind of like the seriousness of the study being taken by the government as well. So I guess like if there are ways to collaborate, you know, like across like NGO with kind of like bigger organizations that would really like improve the accountability and the support coming from the government. But going back to your methodology question, the other one that we've been looking at as well is we utilize the RISE accountability framework to look into like the systems and in what ways the ecosystem make it difficult for school leaders to focus on teaching and learning outcomes.
Great, yeah. Thanks so much. And then, yeah, Rebecca, maybe just like 1 minute. If you...
Rapidly. A quick comment on the point about A/B testing. What we can and can't learn from it, and in terms of the A/B testing we've been doing. If I give the example of the data dashboards that we've been looking at, we see, okay, you feed back this data to teachers about which learners potentially need more support. And then we've seen from the data that the tool collects from thousands of schools that there is an impact and a change in usage, but there's a gap. We don't know what the teachers are changing. We don't know what the behaviors are because it's all coming through the tool. And that's where, if I segue into Sabina's question around other methodologies, where complementing these different methodologies alongside each other has been so important for us. So for example, work we were doing as part of our design-based research phase, we adopted a form of lesson study where we were planning with teachers, then implementing, reflecting, iterating, and doing that process again repeatedly over a course of 2 weeks. And that process really taught us so much about what the teachers are doing and why they're doing it, their rationale for that, which was so fundamental. So I think that, A/B testing is teaching us a lot of scale as to what impact it's having, and then what we're really enjoying is actually listening to the teachers alongside them as to understand those changes in behaviours. And finally, the point about governments. I will point to IDU to tell you more about their partnerships with the Kenyan government. But I would say that looking at the alignment, and all of the content is approved by the KICD, the Curriculum Institute. So that it is aligned, but looking at what that alignment looks like, we also did lots of interviews with the early childhood development officers who are embedded in this process of implementing and supporting teachers to deliver the lesson plans. So there's a whole kind of ecosystem there. The bell is gone. I encourage you to talk to IDU and us more afterwards about that.
Great, thanks so much, Rebecca. So yeah, thank you so much to our panelists and to everyone that asked questions. It was a really interesting session. I learned a lot, so please do grab them if you have other questions at the end. And I think just to end, I think it's really exciting that the What Works Hub is going to be creating more guidance on how to do this. So I think in subsequent years, there's a lot that the other implementers can learn from this, can learn more about A/B testing, both in terms of those kind of learning efficiencies, but also cost effectiveness. And then I also hope on the equity side and sustainability piece too. So hopefully as years to come and future What Works Hub conferences, we'll hear more about this. So yeah, really exciting. So thanks again. And yeah, enjoy. I think we're moving to the break next. Yeah, great. Thanks all.